So after thinking about it for some time, I finally decided to take the plunge and build a brush guard for my truck. And it turned just a plain old front end into this. To start out with, I removed the two brackets from underneath the truck. All I'm going to do is use these to transfer the two holes onto the new brackets. Now these new brackets are going to be made out of a piece of 6x4 angle iron. And once I set it up in the saw to make my cut, it's about a 5 or 6 minute cut. It's a pretty good hunk of steel. So it takes a little while. So after I turn the saw on, I find something else to do for a little while it's cutting. And about like always, the first piece I cut, I use as a pattern to cut all the rest. But in this case, there's not but two. After I lay out my pattern using the old bracket and transfer my holes to this, I use a center punch to put me some little dingers in there. That'll keep my drill bit from wanting to walk when I go to drill my holes. So normally, the way I like to do things is if I have to cut a piece of metal with, say, a straight cut on the one end and an angle on the other, I'll just go ahead and cut all my pieces to length. Then I will set the saw to whatever angle I want and come back and cut all the pieces again. This way I don't have to keep setting the saw from one angle back to straight, setting it back and forth. As you can see, it's kind of time consuming. You got to loosen those two bolts and then put a speed square on there or angle finder, whatever, to set your angles. So to keep from doing that over and over and over, I just cut all my pieces one length and then come back and cut my angles later. Now I'm cutting 45s on these pieces. And the reason I do that is I don't want no open ends on this frame. So when you cut your corners, you put them together, there's no open ends. So I believe this next piece I'm cutting is going to be 22.5 degrees on one side and 45 on the other. So I don't have nothing except this to make a 22.5 degree cut. So I'm just going to draw on my table a 22-degree angle, then set this to that, then put this in the saw to get my angle. Nothing like starting a project with a pair of brand new gloves. Too bad they're not going to look like this for much longer. Now these pieces will weld to the brackets that bolt under the truck. They're going to run straight forward out the front of the truck and then turn 90 degrees up. And when I go to put my 45s together, I always bevel the ends. That way you give your weld somewhere to go. It's not just laying flat on the side. This will help your weld to lay down flat and get a little bit better penetration. Notice how I leave the two pieces hanging over the edge of the table just a little bit. Then I rest my hand on my pliers to make my weld. These are the two pieces that are going to support the brush guard coming out the front of the truck. Now I wished I was skilled enough to get all my measurements and just build this thing on a table and then come in and bolt it up later. But I just can't do it. I'm going to have to just bolt these pieces on and then build this thing as I go, piece by piece. with these two pieces sticking out of the front. It kind of looks like one of them bulldogs that drools all over themselves. By using a scrap piece of just whatever I could find, I clamped two pieces, one on each side, and this will support the next bracket that's going to get welded in here. It also holds everything in plane with itself. Since I don't have a table or nothing flat to lay it on, this will keep everything in line for me, so I don't have to try to do guesswork or use squares or nothing like that. This is a very easy way to do this. It's running out of square just a little bit, so I use a ratchet strap to pull it back in for me. Now this part requires a little guesswork. I clamped this board down right here, and it's going to kind of replicate my next piece of steel that I'm going to weld in. So to get this angle, I just keep bumping the board over until I look down it and make sure it's running parallel with the truck. Then I'll lay something straight up there and make my mark to get my angle. And I believe after I made my mark, it was a 22-degree angle. I get a piece of scrap wood and cut a notch out in it. That way it'll fit around that piece of steel, and I can clamp to it on both sides, and it will hold both pieces straight from one side to the other. This is a nifty little trick. It works great and keeps everything straight and in line. So I got two pieces, one on the top and the bottom. And let's face it, they're supposed to be running parallel with each other. So I clamp another piece of scrap angle iron to the top one and let it run down. Then I just bump this one over a little bit until it touches. Now I know the top and the bottom piece are straight with each other. Now I've got about a dozen clamps or so holding all this together. And doing this kind of work, you've got to have a bunch of clamps. You know, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, "Yeah, I wished I didn't have so many clamps laying around." So far through this whole project, I haven't welded nothing all the way yet. I've just been tacking everything together. And this is a prime reason why right here. For whatever reason, I cut the top piece about a ½ inch too long. So breaking these three tacks off was much easier than had I welded this thing all the way around. Okay, so I just lay a straight edge across the top and measure from the bottom up till right under the little Toyota emblem. I don't want the piece to come up and cover that up. I want to be able to see it. So how to find my length I need to cut on that next angle, I measure up with my square, 3 3/4 inches, and then I just move over and make a mark at a 45. Then I just measure that mark I made, and that's how long to cut my next piece. Now I'm measuring these pieces I just put on to make sure they're the same height. And once again, about 95 clamps later, to keep everything straight, I'm ready to weld in this top piece. I'm planning on hanging 2 shackles off the front of this brush guard. So to make my brackets for those, I'm going to use this real heavy piece of 4x4 hunk of steel. And I'm just going to cut off 1-inch pieces. That should be plenty thick enough to hang shackles from. So with this blade and this saw, it takes right around 10 minutes to cut each piece. So you talking about going through some coffee while you wait. And as your pieces get smaller, you have to get creative on how you clamp them in there. I'm going to drill 3 holes in this block. Now the 2 3/8 holes are going to be for the radius. I'm going to notch that piece of the block out so it'll fit around that 1.5 inch square tubing. And by putting a radius in there, it should fit a little bit tighter. And the reason I'm doing that is so I can get more surface area for my welds, because those need to be really strong if I ever decide to pull something with them. Using transfer punches, I lay out my next block with the first block that I made. It's hard to beat a good set of transfer punches when it comes to laying out plates. It speeds the process up a lot. As far as using transfer punches, you don't want to hit those hard. Just a little dinger is all you need. Then come back with a center punch and hit it hard. I use a gigantic countersink just to kind of chamfer the edges a little bit. Makes everything nice and smooth. There's about a dozen different ways to cut these out. I decided to use the bandsaw just to show the world that with a little time and a good saw blade, you can cut these out. I mean, I could have used a cutoff wheel on a grinder, or I do have a milling machine. I could have milled it out, but I just decided to cut it like this, and it worked just fine. This is what I was talking about earlier. I have all this extra surface area to weld around. By notching these out 1 inch, that allowed me 4 extra inches of weld on these blocks. It's going to make them so much stronger. I'm going to add this piece in the middle of the brush guard to hang a tag on or something. My wife said she's going to make me a "here at the house" tag to go on the front. I wished I had it to show it on this video, but I haven't got it yet. My daddy doesn't know it yet, but I cut up our good chain that we pick up lawnmowers with. But this was essential. I just had to have it. I think adding the chains was a nice touch. But then I come around to the back side and weld in gussets, one on the top and one on the side. This will add a lot of extra support. Right now, I'm treating this brush guard like a piece of glass. Remember, I only have it tacked together and I do not want it to break. But after I get it up on my welding table, I just commence to welding. I think I've got about 3 hours worth of welding on this thing. For paint, I'm using bed liner spray paint. I've never used it before, but I like the way this stuff turned out. This has been some more adventure. I have never built a brush guard before. I have never installed a brush guard before. I'm pretty sure I've leaned up against one or two out in parking lots or hay fields at one point or another, but this was brand new to me. And I have learned a lot going through this little process. It was fun, it was challenging, and I hope it's gonna be a while before I do it again. But like always, thank you so very much for watching here at the house.